And just like that, we back. Camera 1, camera 2, camera 1, camera 2, Wayne's World. We're back with another reflection on the Daily Vedantic, and we're going back into the DMs on Instagram. You can shoot over any question you want. The DMs of our Instagram account, the Daily Vedantic, easy to find, but it does have underscores in between the words. The Daily Vedantic. I think it has maybe 12,000 followers or something, so it should pop up first, but there is an account that I think is private that does not have the underscores. So make sure that you shoot the DM, the question, to the right account with all of the same logos and everything. And Emily H. asks, how did you first come across Vedanta? And importantly, why did you think it was true? Great question. And I love the second part of that question, Emily. First came across Vedanta. I think I touch on this in the intro episode of this podcast project, but I first came across this philosophy in Malibu, where we are sitting now, while I was living in San Francisco 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, I had just come across one of my favorite philosophers, this guy, Alan Watts, this British philosopher with epic voice, accent, and Ram Dass, another titan of questioning and philosophy, Harvard-trained psychologist, Richard Alpert, that then changed his name to Ram Dass. He would describe Alan Watts as the most erudite, articulate individual he had ever met, meaning the most well-read, articulate individual he had ever come across. That's what they call high praise in the biz. So I heard that and I was like, well, I want to take in this Alan Watts guy. Started to listen to Alan Watts. Thought very much the same thing. Great articulate voice. He had this wide breadth of exposure of basically all world philosophy. He was an Episcopalian priest and then a author of a number of books after he left the Episcopal Church on Eastern philosophy. Now, I had come across this episode or this interview of his. He would rarely say what his primary influences were. He would just describe Buddhism. He would famously say, I'm not here to sell anything. Not here to convert anyone to any viewpoint. He would just say, I'm a philosophical entertainer, like someone would play Mozart. So he would philosophically entertain, but never say what his primary influences were until the last year of his life. I see this video on YouTube. I listened to thousands of hours of old Alan Watts a decade ago, and just I still make music, and I weave his lines here and there over music, all with permission from the Alan Watts Foundation, by the way, which you can get if anybody ever wants to use his work. You can reach out to them, and they make it pretty easy to use his work and things. But this interview was a great interview, but 45 minutes, the most important part was 45 minutes into the interview, the interviewer says, at this point in life, this was the year that he died, at this point in life, what are your primary influences? And he mentioned Roman Catholicism, which I grew up Catholic and in the Catholic Church, and I knew that side of things decently well. And I thought when I was 6, I wanted to be a priest. And then he said these 2 words, and also Advaita Vedanta. And I was like, wait, what? I've listened to this guy for thousands of hours. Advaita what? Advaita Vedanta means non-dual end of knowledge. It is it comes from the Vedas. That's what this philosophy, this podcast is all about. And it is, in terms of continuous study, Vedanta is the oldest philosophy on the planet. There are some that were older, but in terms of people that continuously study it, there are still tens of millions of people that study Vedanta each day around the globe, if not more. Could be over 100. But this was the first time that I heard him mention this philosophy. I would then go on to realize his most famous book, called The Book, The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, was all Vedanta. But I think he only used the word once in the book. He might have used it twice. But it was just him waxing philosophically without saying over and over again, this is Vedanta, this is Vedanta. So I heard that and I said, all right, for the next few months, if that's where he ends, if that's where he gets at the end of his 30-year pursuit of philosophy and approach to understanding the universe full time, if that's where he gets to at the end, I'm just going to go straight there. After going wide for a few years, I said, all right, I'm going to go a few months just going deep into this Vedanta stuff. A month after saying that, my wife and I are taking a trip down to Malibu, to Calamigos Ranch, and a really great place to stay down here, that she had been with friends, and she said, you got to go check this place out. It's so cool. We came down, and I'm opening up the side drawer to put my phone, my watch, my keys away for the weekend. The symbolism of that would hit me 8 years later, only a year or two ago. Putting those away, and I see this book called Vedanta Treatise, the one that I'm always talking about on this podcast project. And I pull that out, put the others in the drawer, and I'm like, wait, what? I remember thinking, man, SoCal is so out there. They have books on Eastern philosophy in the side tables in the resorts. Turns out it was probably only that one resort that had this book in its side table. It's because the people that run Calamigos Ranch study this philosophy. That book, opened it up, and I read the quotes on the liner pages. I'll read some of them right now. I have the book right here. In addition to my favorite philosopher, and a lot of philosophers today, their favorite philosopher, Alan Watts, speaking about the value of this philosophy and how he felt like it most accurately described this experience here. You can fast forward 10 years and then ask ChatGPT the exact same premise of knowing everything you know about philosophy, science, and religion. What do you think is the most accurate description of what's happening in the universe, philosophically? And you can ask it that question, and then as a follow-up, say, is Advaita Vedanta that? Because usually it gives a kind of modern philosophical naming of monistic idealism, idealistic monism. It has pantheistic idealism. It has a few different ways of articulating in kind of modern language, and then you just ask, is Advaita Vedanta that? And I'll let you do that for you to see the answer, because it is worth doing. And you can rewind this episode to hear that prompt again, that question again. So, the end of the Alan Watts story, the end of the ChatGPT triangulation of the access that it has to all of human knowledge, and the end of the Vedas, which translates in Sanskrit to knowledge. Vedanta meaning the end of knowledge, points to Vedanta. And my life at that point pointed to this book, Vedanta Treatise. But before talking about the end, and that really is for another episode, let me just talk about the beginning here for a sec. You open up the book and you see these kinds of quotes. It is not the world that distresses you, but how you relate to it. The soul of religion has been slain and people are hugging on to its carcass. That's a really dope one. The law of life is that the mind should be at rest while the body engages in action. Your home should be the center, not the boundary of your affection. You can see on here, in addition to one of my daughters that drew on it, you can see just a smattering of these quotes kind of in all different order on the page. It's not linear. It's not, you're not reading one after the other. They're kind of, there's a pattern to them, and it really invites you to reflect on each one in the way that it is written. The role of Vedanta is to free you from infatuation to celebrities and educate you on the eternities. Modern civilized ones without self-development are but intelligent savages, living in spiritual slums. A person thinking rationally today is a needle in a haystack. Transform your unilateral passion into universal adoration. So these go on. One of them is, you get what you deserve, not what you desire. That is, as innocuous as that might sound, you get what you deserve and not what you desire. That can be a really heavy one if you find yourself in the midst of extremely undesirable circumstance. You get what you deserve. And yet it can also be the most freeing, liberating notion that one could adopt to get out of such a circumstance. To recognize our role and our responsibility in our lives. We make ourselves, we mar ourselves. We are the authors, as Swami will say quite often in his lectures, we are the authors of our fortune. We are the authors of our misfortune. We get what we deserve in life, not what we desire. There are a handful of these quotes in the front and in the back. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go deep into this philosophy. And this book is going to guide me for the next month or two. And then I'm going to get another book and another book and another book. And today, 10 years later, I'm going through this book 2 or 3 pages at a time for the 7th time in a row. There is the e-learning, the online lectures that anyone can jump into that are given by the author of this book and Swami Parthasarathi, our teacher. He's written 11 other books, so 12 books total. He goes through all 12. And there is of the 3-year course, 2 years spent on the Gita. So there are a handful of other books that have joined in the chorus of this philosophy and the study of this philosophy each day. But this is the anchor. This is the one that 10 years in, every line still feels like I'm reading it for the first time. The next episode's going to have to be on we get what we deserve, not what we desire, because that's certainly one that every time I think about it, it hits me like it's hitting me for the first time, with all of the responsibility that type of notion drenches you in, and all of the liberation that is at hand when you tap into the fact that we get what we deserve, not what we desire. But that, Emily, is the story of how I came across Vedanta. And that second part of why did I think it was true is through my own experience. I had just had a major a major failure in life. And I very much knew that I deserved that failure. I could not pawn it off and blame others. I knew that I was the primary actor in that failure. I also felt like in my experiences when I read those other quotes, and this was the beginning of feeling. I mean, Alan Watts' endorsement was, that was the backdrop. But when I read these quotes and a handful of others, I was like, the soul of religion has been slain and people are hugging onto its carcass. I was like, wow, a philosophy that has metaphysical, spiritual elements to it, but is calling out the state of our relationship with religion so bluntly. It is, these all hit me like a ton of bricks. Here's one that I'm reading again. Do not lose the treasure of yourself for the pleasure of the senses. Yeah, I was reading these and I could get lost in reading them again. Each one could and likely should become their own episodes. And the next one will be on that quote of, we get what we deserve, not what we desire. But that is the story of how I came to it, and opening this book within not even the first page, it was the liner notes. It made me think there's probably a good bit of truth within these pages. 10 years later, still reading that book, and I know I recommend it probably every other episode, but if you have not bought and checked out Vedanta Treatise, I highly, highly recommend not only the plain-spoken, simple approach to this timeless philosophy that is within those pages, but also the systematic nature in which it walks you through not just philosophy, but life itself. With no woo, no leaps of faith. There's no kind of like woo-woo elements that you have to pause or surrender your reason. It is so, it's Swami's, our teacher is a trained lawyer. It's written like a lawyer, analytically, and written in a modern, plain English way that I have yet to come across anything like it since. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We will see you next time. Feel free to drop in any questions you might have on our Instagram, and I will try to get to them.